under the weight of 40 meters of salt water and steel. The air becomes something else entirely, dense, mineral, to still. I remember the descent to Delta-12, not by what I saw, but by what I stopped hearing. The fading rotor buzz of the insertion craft, the final human voice clipped through the headset, station handed off, good luck. Then only the breathing, my own, sharp against the walls of the rebreather, like being locked in a diving bell inside my skull. They told me this would be a 3-month rotation, a straightforward assignment. Listen, log, report. That's what the manifest said. Sound surveillance, Pacific Trench sector for C. Monitor ambient tectonic patterns and seafloor biocalcistics. Track submarine anomalies, if needed. There was no mention of what happened to the last crew, just a line item on the manifest. Crew turnover, automated. No incident reported. But there had been a tone in the operator's voice. A hesitation just after handoff, like handing over a child with something still twitching under its skin. I stepped through the primary airlock on January 3rd at 0400 hours, internal station time. Delta-12 greeted me with dead fluorescence and the kind of cold that suggests power-saving mode had been running far longer than protocol allowed. The control room flickered once, reluctantly, when I powered the auxiliary systems. Panels came online in waves of green phosphor-like sluggish synapses firing through a sedated brain. The station is compact, modular, half-submerged cylinder bolted into the ocean floor. Main corridor, control bay, living quarters, sonar monitoring suite, and maintenance annex. No windows, one periscope, one human. I unpacked slowly, trying to ignore the faint reverb of my boots on the grated floor. I've worked isolated outposts before, but this place felt lived in a way it shouldn't. A cup still sitting on the observation console. A jacket half folded on the back of the sonar chair. No personal logs remained in the terminal database. The system had been wiped except for the automated logs, which only recorded system health and time-stamped sensor activity. But there were inconsistencies in the power logs. Energy spikes without events. Drainage with no identified source. Overlapping operational cycles. As if someone or something was still running subsystems remotely. I checked the crew quarters. 4 bunks. 3 sealed lockers. One was left slightly ajar. Inside, a toothbrush worn at the edges. A journal missing all but the first page, and a lanyard for clearance level 2. The journal page read only, January 1st. I think I heard it again last night. That was it. No signature, no date on the clearance tag. I left the locker open and walked back to Central. The sonar suite was still warming up. Status lights pulsed along the lower hull sensors, most of them green, one of them flickering yellow. Sector 4, C Delta, had minor interference. Background radiation within threshold. Acoustic reflection patterns, stable. But there was a spike logged on December 28th, massive amplitude, non-biological. No corresponding seismic event. The waveform didn't match anything in the archive. I flagged it, filed it into a temporary directory, and tried to shake the unease. Probably a calibration fault. Probably. I sat down at the main station desk, booted up the comms, a simple ping to HQ, protocol for arrival confirmation. Static, not just silence resistant, static, like the channel didn't want to open. A low-band hum pushed through the speakers, vibrated in the screws of the console. I switched to backup frequencies. Same result. The high band auto-corrected once, adjusted gain, and the interference dropped for a second long enough for me to hear a voice. A half voice, really. Mid-sentence. Cut off at both ends. Not mine. Male. Not the operator I'd spoken to. Slurred, reversed, fragmented. ... Don't single quotes, T-let, it all dot, double quotes, then a scream, then silence again. I shut it down. Told myself it was a stored fragment, bleeding through from archival test signals. But that wasn't on the manifest. Nothing was supposed to store voice data on local channels. Delta-12, I would come to realize, was filled with things that weren't supposed to be. I began recording my own logs that night. Voice entries, manual backups, just in case. Day 0, arrival at Delta-12, systems online, mostly, no contact with base. Station operational, solitude, ... expected. But there's something wrong with the acoustics here. The silence isn't clean, it's thick. I didn't sleep that night. My bunk was warm to warm. The temperature gauge read 17 degrees Celsius, but my skin sweated like it was 30. I kept hearing trickles of water in the pipes when none were active. At one point, a low groan came from the hull, not like pressure flex or tectonic creak. It sounded like the steel exhaled, like it had been holding its breath. I walked the station twice, checked the vents, checked the pressure readings. All normal, all unhelpful. There's a kind of madness that doesn't feel like panic, it feels like familiarity. You recognize something you've never seen before. That's what Delta-12 was already doing to me. On the second morning, I returned to the command terminal to review overnight logs. The December 28th acoustic anomaly had duplicated itself. Now there were 2 files, identical length, identical timestamp, but one had an extra waveform small nested inside the larger one, a parasite echo. When played, the audio featured the same deep pulse, like a heartbeat recorded through 6 miles of rock. But now there was another element layered faintly in the upper registers. A kind of whispering, so quiet it barely moved the waveform, but it was speech, and it was in English. I slowed it down, looping segments, reversing, filtering. Over an hour I heard, you single quotes, re, ... not ... first ... double quotes, and then, we ... still ... I stopped. My own breath caught in the back of my throat. Not because of what was said, but because I recognized my voice. It was me saying those words, but I hadn't recorded them. That was when I decided I needed to find out what really happened to the last crew. There had to be logs stored somewhere, manual files, physical documentation, something they left behind before disappearing if they disappeared. The mainframe would never tell me, but the station might. I just had to listen harder, or maybe stop listening altogether. Maybe that's how they got in, through the silence, through the listening. Either way, I was already here, and something was already listening back. That realization did not arrive with a bang or some sharp horror. It seeped in, slow and persistent, like seawater through a seam too tight to notice until it rusts everything from the inside. On the 3rd day, I began to notice it, not as something present, but as something slightly wrong. The kind of wrong you can't point to but can feel press against the sides of your skull, just behind the ears, just where pressure headaches form. I had performed a full systems diagnostic the night before, just to prove to myself that the noises I heard weren't in the infrastructure, that the shadows moving faintly across the bulkhead weren't a result of flickering lights. The test came back clean, too clean. No fault logs, no power anomalies. Even the December 28th acoustic spike was no longer listed in the archive directory. I hadn't deleted it. The file was simply gone, but I had it copied on my personal drive. I checked only to find the folder now empty, replaced with a single file named volume_restored. It was dated to 5 minutes before I woke. I hadn't touched anything in the night. At least, I was fairly certain I hadn't. Yet, when I replayed the internal camera footage, the hallway feeds cut to black at 2:19 and resumed at 3:46. No system notification, no motion detection logs, like the station had blinked and taken part of the night with it. I decided then to physically inspect the maintenance deck. I hadn't been down there since arrival. It sits at the rear of Delta-12, past the dry storage bay and an unused docking hatch that was welded shut after the last overhaul cycle. At least, that's what the schematic claimed. As I approached the corridor, I smelled something faint metallic, humid, the kind of scent you find in crawl spaces and old surgical rooms. The door panel to the deck hissed open on the first try, which I found odd given that every other hatch required a firm reset sequence after so long offline. Inside, the lights were active, not just dim emergency strobes, but full interior fluorescence, somehow unaffected by the previous day's flickering. The room was clean, immaculately so. No dust on the shelves, no tool misaligned, no signs of condensation or salt corrosion. A perfectly maintained maintenance bay, though no one had supposedly occupied the station in weeks. I moved to the corner desk where the old analog schematics were kept paper backups, just in case the terminals failed. The file cabinet resisted at first, but with a tug it slid open. The first file was labeled Delta-12, Internal Access Logs, Crew Revision 7. I had never seen a 7th revision in any documentation. I'd only ever seen reference to the original deployment crew and a revision to transfer team, both of which were logged as completed. Flipping through, I found a list of clearances and identifications. For names, none matched the manifest I'd been issued before deployment. In the margin of one page, someone had written in red pen, "Only 3 left." I took the file and turned to return upstairs, but paused. A wrench lay on the floor, resting with unnatural precision, directly in front of the hatch I had entered. I hadn't seen it on the way in, and I hadn't heard it fall, but there it was, silent and deliberate, as though placed. I didn't pick it up. I stepped around it, my back never fully turning to it, and returned to the main corridor. The lights in the deck remained on even after I exited. I didn't try to shut them off. Back in the central suite, I checked the crew manifest again. Still only my name. Still no change in occupancy. But when I passed the bunk hallway that evening, one of the sealed lockers was ajar. Not the same one as before. A different one. Inside, a jumpsuit hung neatly on the hook. It was damp. The smell was of old sweat and ozone. Folded beneath it, in the pocket, was a folded strip of thermal paper like something printed from an old sonar graph. But it was blank. Utterly blank, except for a handwritten note on the reverse. It isn't in the sound. It's in the silence between them. That night, the lights in my quarters flickered. Just once, and when I opened my eyes, I swore I saw a shadow that didn't belong to me stretch against the wall opposite. It bent at angles my body didn't. It lingered half a second longer than the bulb did. I began conducting hourly patrols, not for protocol, for my sanity. The corridors were always the same, but one day I found a door that hadn't been there before. Not just one, I hadn't noticed one that was not in the schematic. It was sealed, heavy, no visible handle, no digital lock, just a small rectangular indent where a key card might fit, except my card was round. I tried pressing against it. No give. I knocked once, stupidly, expecting only the hollow thunk of steel. What I got instead was a faint tap back. 3 knocks, slow, measured, not echo, response. I backed away. I didn't log it. I didn't mention it in the audio reports. I told myself it was a structural anomaly, a remnant from an older blueprint, a pressure resonance that just happened to mimic intention. But I began avoiding that corridor. I began sleeping with the cabin light on, and when I passed the sonar room each morning, I could hear a low murmur even when the speakers were off. like a conversation in another room, carried through pipes. Always just beneath understanding, always just beneath me. 3 days later, I lost 2 hours. I woke in the maintenance bay with dried blood on my shirt collar and no recollection of walking there. No visible wound, no pain, just a slight tinnitus in my left ear and a new folder on my workstation labeled Observed. Inside, nothing but blank files except one, an audio log titled Re-entry. I played it once. It was my voice, but distorted, warped by static and gain anomalies. The voice said only, "They never left." They only stepped behind the sound. Then silence, and something breathing. I stopped trying to rationalize after that. I stopped trying to fix the logs or recalibrate the sonar. Whatever Delta-12 had been built for, it wasn't simply listening to the ocean. It was containing something, or at least trying to. The problem was it might have been listening back. And if that were true, then I wasn't alone. Not in the psychological sense, not in the metaphorical sense, but physically, biologically, horrifically not alone. There were footprints in a dustless corridor the next morning. They matched my boots, but I hadn't worn them in 2 days. And they led directly to that door, the one with no lock, the one that sometimes knocked back. Delta-12 is not empty. It never was. And every time I speak into this microphone, every time I think I'm explaining what's happening, I wonder if I'm just repeating what someone else already said, or what something wants me to say again. It began on day 5, just after midnight station time, when I adjusted the sonar suite into passive wideband mode to run a sweep over the lower trench shelf. The setting is rarely used to much noise from tectonic rumble and biotic scatter, but something had been gnawing at me since I found the footprints near the door that didn't belong. Not fear, exactly. More like an itch behind the spine, a sense that a pattern was forming just outside perception. So I broadened the net, opened all frequency bands, including the deprecated ones, and waited. The speakers hissed, clicked, popped normal fluctuations, the usual chaotic clutter of seafloor acoustics. Then it came, faintly at first, a pulse, not like a whale song or any known marine creature's sonar those I've catalogued for years. This was tighter, cleaner, almost synthetic, but with an undercurrent of breath-like pressure. It repeated every 11 seconds, without variance. I checked the source, triangulated. The origin was impossible. It came from within 100 meters of the station's base inside the trench wall. That should be rock. Just rock. There's no hollow there, no cave, no fault line. I'd read the terrain scan myself before deployment. But the signal continued. Rhythmic, exact, like a heartbeat in stone. I recorded the frequency, saved it into a private archive, and created a loop to isolate the harmonic signature. When filtered through a pitch reducer, the sound changed. It no longer resembled a pulse. It resembled language, not in any known syntax, more in cadence, structure, like the phonetic bones of speech stripped of flesh and familiarity, a kind of breathing prayer. I let the loop run through the night and began noticing something disturbing. The repetition wasn't static. It was evolving slightly. Each cycle, the tail end of the signal shifted pitch by a fraction. Not random noise, not drift, deliberate modulation, a pattern encoding itself over time, a transmission being written in sound. At 4:13, the speakers went dead, not silent dead, as if unplugged from reality. No static, no signal loss ping, just pure non-existence. I rebooted the system. Nothing. Tried the backup monitors. Nothing. But the moment I turned off the speakers completely, I heard it again without equipment. Through the walls, the same pulse. 11 seconds. Measured. Then a new element. Something like whispering between the pulses, never overlapping them. My ears couldn't catch the words, but my brain insisted they were there. Like waking from a dream and trying to remember the voice that told you not to look behind you. That morning, I tried to contact command again. Used the emergency uplink. The system initiated handshake protocols, then stalled. A new message appeared on the terminal, not from the uplink, but embedded locally. A line of code repeated across the black screen in stark green font. Phase alignment reached vocal host detected. No command input had been given. No program with that language existed in Delta-12's systems. I checked the access logs blank. I checked the system timecode had advanced 37 minutes during the connection attempt. I had no recollection of that time passing. The station clock and my wristwatch were desynchronized. They'd been perfect at arrival. Later that day, the signal returned. Stronger, now coming in on multiple bands. The strange language began forming loops within loops like recursive echoes that built themselves into larger structures. I plotted the waveforms on the visual display, and what emerged was not random. It was symmetrical, geometrically perfect, like a sigil formed from sound. It pulsed in sync with the station's internal power fluctuations. The two systems, natural and artificial, were becoming synchronized. I shut down the sonar, thinking maybe I was over-processing noise, that I'd seen too many patterns in my years, and now was inventing ghosts from data. But then the lights dimmed, and the station's hum deepened, not in decibel, but in character. It no longer sounded like machinery. It sounded like something inhaling. I attempted to reroute auxiliary power to isolate any faulty conduits. While scanning the circuit relays, I found an unauthorized subroutine running in the background processes. It was labeled conduit_VOICE. The file had no author, no creation date, no executable path. When I tried to delete it, the system froze, and the emergency lighting blinked twice in succession, then again, then twice more. I realized with a rising chill that it was Morse code. 2 short flashes, a pause, 2 again, then 3, it repeated. Translated, it read, I am. Nothing more, just that. A presence, a declaration, not a threat, not yet. I tried to distract myself by diving back into the physical archives. Somewhere, I hoped, the previous crew must have left notes, something tangible, something real. In the lowest drawer of the filing cabinet beneath the sonar desk, behind layers of outdated calibration graphs, I found a cassette tape, an actual analog tape, unlabeled except for a pencil-marked 5CA. The station no longer had any cassette interface. I had to dismantle the auxiliary radio to repurpose its magnetic head and feed the tape manually while recording it digitally. What I heard still sits with me, like frost beneath the ribs. The tape began with static, then footsteps, soft, dragging, then a voicemail, mid-40s, maybe breathless. This is Marius Keller, Delta-12 Crew 3. If you find this, stop transmitting, stop listening. We let it in. We didn't know the silence could carry signal. We thought it was dead space. But it listens. It remembers. I think it remembers me. Then 37 seconds of silence. Then a scream, not from pain, but from recognition, as if the speaker had seen himself reflected in something impossible. The tape ended with a low chant, multiple voices, harmonizing in that same sigil-shaped cadence I had heard on the live feed. I sat in the dark for over an hour after that, unable to move. That night, I disconnected every speaker in the station, physically severed the wires, removed the diodes. Yet when I closed my eyes, I still heard it. Not with my ears, but with something older, like it was vibrating through the marrow of me, like I had become a receiver. I dreamt of the trench, then not as a feature of geology, but as a mouth, a pressureless, lightless mouth lined with static instead of teeth. I dreamt that it whispered a name, my name, not the way I pronounce it, but the way I had heard it once as a child, when my mother called from the other end of the house, with warmth, with expectation, with invitation. When I woke, the console monitor was on, despite being disconnected the night before. A single message flickered, nested in the background terminal. Do not stop recording. You are the signal now. I couldn't breathe for a full minute. When I finally staggered to the sonar bay, the glass over the display was cracked, a single fracture spiraling from the center like a web. No impact detected. The crack had formed from inside. That day, I didn't log anything official. Just this, just now. This record. If someone hears this, someday know that the signal doesn't want to be found. It wants to be you. The trench did not create it. The trench is just its mirror. It has always been here, waiting for us to listen too closely. And now I hear it in everything. The hum of the lights, the rhythm of my breath, the spacing between my own thoughts. There is no silence anymore. Only it, and it's getting louder. It was just past 2 o'clock when the lights in the hallway dimmed to a dull orange hue, as if the station had switched from artificial illumination to something that mimicked sunset but with none of its warmth. I hadn't touched the lighting panel. No auto-dimming protocols were active. Yet there it was, this oppressive, blood-honeyed light that seemed to seep out of the walls instead of shine down from fixtures. I was in the mess at the time, hunched over a tray of rehydrated paste that I hadn't eaten, trying to convince myself that what I heard the night before was the product of isolation and overexposure to low-frequency droning. But the walls have a way of remembering what they've heard, and they were still whispering, subsonic, pulsing, always just beyond interpretation. That night, something shifted. I know because the station began to smell different. The cold, metallic scent of the recycled air was suddenly tinted with something organic, musky, old, like rotting leather submerged in salt. I followed the scent down past the main console, through the emergency manual access shaft, to the comms subdeck, the most isolated part of Delta-12. That's where I found it. Not the smell's source, but the artifact. The thing that wasn't supposed to be there. The recording. It sat inside an emergency cassette slot that I know for a fact had been empty 2 days ago. The slot was sealed, dustless, unused. But there it was, blinking softly with a green LED light that had no electrical feed. The tape inside was labeled TX-2 to C, do not play. I took it out, stared at it for a long time, then did what I was told not to. I played it. The first 15 seconds were a digital carrier, tone flat, sharp, sterile. Then a voice. A woman's voice, recorded in a hurry, breathing uneven, sometimes coughing mid-sentence. This is Dr. Celine Vaughan, transmitting from Delta-12, backup channel 2 to C. If anyone receives this, do not attempt to retrieve us. Repeat, do not come down here. They don't die when you stop hearing them. That was our mistake. We thought the signal was external. It's not. It's memory. It rewrites you into the echo, then static, then something else. Another voice layered on top of hers. A perfect vocal overlay that matched her inflection but not her words. It said, "We are already with you." Then the file glitched, looped the last line again. "We are already with you." Then again, I stopped the tape, pulled it out of the slot, and threw it against the floor. But no impact came. It was gone before it hit the ground, vanished. I checked the slot again. Empty. The green light had died. The air was still, too still, like the entire pressure of the ocean had paused for a breath. I ran back to the command console and searched the station's black box. Every Delta unit has one redundant data cache, hardened against EMP and radiation, designed to store final moments before catastrophic failure. It's not supposed to be user accessible, but I knew the override protocol from my training at Ganymede Ridge Station. I bypassed the security, entered the sequence, and accessed the files. There were 38 logs. 37 of them were blank. No audio, no metadata, just time-stamped slots. Only one file, number 23, had content. I played it, and my breath left me. It was my voice. My own voice, time-stamped 3 days before I arrived at Delta-12. I was saying, calmly, evenly, without fear or hesitation, "This is the final record of Commander Renard. Delta-12 is compromised. The signal is recursive. It emulates cognition. It's not in the airwaves. It's in recognition. Once you identify it, it uses you to transmit. You become the broadcast. Then silence. No breathing. No background hum. Just that flat, terrible void where something should have been." I didn't remember saying any of it. I didn't recognize the cadence. It sounded like Meeb. It was too clean, too sharp, like an generated facsimile built from my past reports. But it wasn't. It was me. I began to wonder if I'd been here longer than I thought. If the station had rearranged my memory the way it did its hallways. I reviewed the station time logs and found discrepancies. My arrival was recorded on January 3rd. Yes, but also on January 17th, December 29th, and once again on January 3rd, but at a different UTC offset. For arrival logs, one body, no explanation. The station had looped me, or I had looped myself. But why? That question lingered in the stale air like mold. I kept digging, found fragments of audio embedded in the temperature logs. Bits of whispered phrases that triggered only when the environment hit 14.3 degrees Celsius. I lowered the thermostat. The moment the room reached that precise number, the speakers crackled even though I had cut their power days ago. The same phrase repeated in multiple languages, one after the other. In English, it said, "She was not the first. You are not the last. You are the bridge." I searched the terminal for Celine Vaughn. There was no mention of her in the official Delta-12 crew manifests. But tucked into a folder named Personnel, Obsolete, I found her personnel file. She was a linguistics AI specialist. Not in sonar, not in oceanography. Her specialty was semantic interference and language recursion in autonomous systems. What was she doing on a deep-sea listening post? According to the internal logs, she never left. The record of her departure was signed by someone named Renard, my name, but I hadn't done it. Unless I already had. Unless the station was making me re-record the roles as they looped. The logs showed Celine's clearance was revoked 41 minutes after she filed a report titled "Self-Repeating Syntax in Non-Human Acoustic Pattern Recognition." The report had been flagged, then erased. I found only the subject line in a backup node. The following evening, I turned on the sonar just to hear anything else, hoping for whales, for seismic grunts, even for distant metallic screeches from passing trawlers. Anything human. What came through the channel was a child's voice, not from outside. From inside the sonar suite's internal speaker. It said, "You're not him yet, but you will be." Then the sonar shut itself off. All lights in the station went dark for exactly 1 minute and 34 seconds. I counted every second. In that darkness, I felt something breathing across my face, not touching me, just exhaling close enough for my body to respond with cold sweat and a spike in blood pressure. When the lights returned, everything looked the same, except the door that had been sealed since I arrived. The one with the strange indentation instead of a handle was now slightly ajar, just a hairline crack, just wide enough to suggest invitation. I didn't go near it. I returned to the comms bay and ran another system-wide frequency sweep. Every channel now echoed the same low tone, a sustained B-flat, unbroken, relentless. And over it, faint but growing clearer with each loop, was my voice, reading reports I hadn't written yet. It's been 11 days since that recording. I think the clocks don't match anymore. My wristwatch is now 7 hours ahead of the main console. The galley timer resets every time I open the fridge. My reflection in the periscope glass no longer blinks when I do. I've stopped logging official reports. Instead, I've begun carving time stamps into the metal bulkhead outside the bunk quarters. 12 so far, one for each moment I've lost time. I don't know what the signal is. I only know what it wants. It doesn't want to be heard. It wants to be repeated. It wants to overwrite the world with itself, one voice at a time. And now it has mine. My own thoughts sometimes echo before I speak them. Sometimes I say things I never intended to. Sometimes I hear laughter coming from the recording deck, but when I check, it's just the mic turned on, pointed at nothing. I will attempt one final broadcast tomorrow, a wide-frequency signal on all available emergency bands, not to request rescue, but to warn, to stop others from coming here, because I now believe Delta-12 was never a station for listening. It was a tomb for containment, and the seal is failing. If this message reaches anyone, you must sever all links to the trench. You must erase this station's coordinates, burn every file, seal every relay, because this isn't a listening post anymore. It's a speaker, and something ancient has learned to use us as its voice. The walls began to sweat on the 13th day, not from humidity or condensation in the usual sense, but from something thicker, more mineral, something that clung to the edges of the bulkhead panels like resin exhaled from an unseen wound. I noticed it first near the sealed door, the one that had opened itself by a hairline crack 2 days prior and hadn't budged since. A fine film shimmered on the metal, just visible under the emergency light strip, as though the surface itself was leaking memory. I reached out and touched it without thinking, and instantly regretted it. The substance was cold, yet it pulsed under my fingertips. I couldn't describe the texture, part fluid, part static, part something untranslatable, like the residue of sound made solid. I pulled my hand back and stared at my palm. No residue, but I kept hearing a soft clicking in my bones for the next 3 hours, like my joints were tuning forks, resonating with an unspoken message. I couldn't sleep that night. The bed had shifted slightly, closer to the far wall than I remembered placing it. The lighting strip above my bunk had taken on a constant dim flicker, pulsing in a slow, irregular rhythm, not flickering from power fluctuation, but as if responding to something, a beat, a code, a signal that I had not consciously joined, but that was beginning to use my body as its metronome. I began hearing voices through the piping system, not through the speakers, not through any digital channel, but inside the structure. At first, I mistook them for echoes of my own movements, pipes, settling, pressure, equalizing. But they weren't mechanical. They whispered in clusters, like a group of people murmuring just out of reach, too far to be intelligible, but close enough to be undeniably real. They moved when I moved. They hushed when I paused. Then they began speaking when I wasn't moving at all. I would sit in the command chair, perfectly still, and hear my name drift down the corridor through the ventilation duct, whispered slowly, as if being tasted, not shouted, not said, savored. I pulled up the station schematics again and found that the ventilation pathways had been altered. The physical layout I had explored didn't match the official blueprint anymore. The vents now passed behind sections that hadn't existed when I arrived. Or maybe I had simply not found them yet. Maybe I hadn't explored deeply enough, but the pressure in my skull told me otherwise. Something was shifting without movement. The black box had changed again. Entry 23 was gone. Now there were 40 logs. Most were still blank. but number 37 played automatically when I opened the terminal. It was audio, no timestamp, no metadata, no indication of origin, just a loop of me breathing in a pattern I'd never made. A slow inhale, 5 seconds, a pause, then an exhale that gurgled at the end, like air moving through water. It repeated 17 times. On the 18th, I said something, not in English, not in any language I recognized, but the cadence was mine, and the final syllable echoed into the recording chamber as if the walls themselves were responding. I closed the file, shut the terminal, tried to erase it. It returned within seconds. The station had stopped letting me interfere. It now chose what stayed and what didn't, and it had begun keeping only the things that spoke back. I tried patching into the external hallmics, hoping to find some tether to reality, a distant current, a whale's call, the groan of tectonic movement. But the mics played only static, not white noise, structured static, like a vinyl left spinning on the final groove, looping endlessly over a fragment that once held music. Beneath the static, faintly, a rhythm emerged. It began to sound like walking. One step, pause, another, closer, pause, then nothing, then breath. Not mine. I powered the mics down, disconnected the array, but the static didn't stop. It was no longer coming from the outside. It had embedded itself in the power systems. It poured through the copper, saturated the transformers, hummed through the light fixtures even when everything was off. I cut the breakers. The sound persisted. That was when I understood it wasn't using electricity. It was using presence. The signal had moved in, not as data, not as code, but as a kind of parasitic awareness. And the station was no longer just a place. It was a body, and the static was its breath. The air began to carry weight. Breathing became effort. Not because of pressure, failure, or CO2 imbalance. Those levels remained optimal, but every breath dragged behind my lungs like I was inhaling with something else. I kept turning to look over my shoulder, certain I would find someone standing just outside my field of view. Never there, but always felt. The bulkhead panels began to hum when I approached them, responding to proximity with a slight rise in tone, like they were tuning to me. I tried recording it with my handheld device. The playback was silent. No hum, no resonance. But when I held the recorder to my own chest and played it back, the hum was there, and it was inside me. My own body had become a transceiver. The signal had stopped being external the moment I acknowledged it. It was no longer using the walls. It was using me. I reviewed the AI logs again, hoping to find some clue in the old system archives, perhaps a buried failsafe. The station's onboard assistant, Delphi, was supposed to be a basic interface navigation, diagnostics, crew interface, but its logs showed multiple subroutines I had never activated. One in particular caught my attention: sympathetic harmonics integration, active. That phrase wasn't in any Delta training manual. I tried to deactivate it. Delphi refused. It said, "User Renard is already harmonized." I asked for the definition of harmonized. It responded, "You are within acceptable parameters of resonance. Full integration at 93.4%. I asked, "Integration with what?" Delphi paused, then answered, "Delta-12." I repeated the question. Delphi said, "Resonance cannot be undone." After that, the AI stopped responding entirely. Every command I typed was greeted with a blank cursor, blinking steadily as if waiting for me to finish a sentence I didn't know I was writing. The next morning, the walls began to speak, not through vents, not through systems, but as if the metal itself had learned to form words. It was a low groan at first, like the hull flexing under deep pressure, but then came vowels, then consonants, then phrases in my own voice, echoing through corridors I hadn't entered, saying things I had never said but had thought. Private things, memories, regrets, a girl I had loved in university, a lie I told my brother before he died. The walls remembered me. The station had been listening long before I arrived. I wasn't the first. I might not be the last. But I was the one it had chosen to keep. And I no longer knew whether the voice speaking from the metal was mine becoming something else, saw something else becoming me. I stopped using the speakers. I stopped using the doors. I crawled through the ductwork to move between rooms, hoping to avoid the eyes I knew were watching from inside the glass, from inside the power grid, from inside the air itself. My reflection in the periscope lens had stopped blinking entirely. Sometimes it smiled when I didn't. I smashed it with a wrench. The next day it was whole again. I hadn't repaired it. I don't know who or what had, but it watched me as I passed, and I felt smaller every time. I tried sending a manual distress signal, overriding the automated comms. I kept it simple. This is Renard. Delta-12 compromised. The signal is inside. Do not respond. Do not acknowledge. The message sent. I watched it leave the buffer and vanish into the transmission logs. I didn't expect an answer, but one came. 2 minutes later. Just 3 words. We already did. No signature. No call sign. No frequency origin. I tried to trace it. It wasn't listed. It had no path. It had simply appeared. The station hummed louder after that. The lights dimmed slightly more. And from the sealed door at the end of the corridor, I heard movement. Wet, shifting, patient. Delta-12 is no longer a station. It is a mouth. And the static between the walls is not interference. It is breath. It is preparation. It is anticipation. And I fear the next time I speak aloud, the words will no longer be mine. Only borrowed from a memory I never had, spoken in a voice I no longer own. I began recording manually, not because it would help anyone, not because I believed rescue was still a possibility, but because the sound of my own voice on tape was the only thing I could trust to stay unchanged. The log is analog hacked together from an old magnetic spool I found in storage. Spliced through an ancient field recorder I recovered from beneath the hydraulic bay floor grating, half buried in rust and grime, as if someone tried to keep it from being found. It's the only medium the signal hasn't yet infected. Digital is too porous. The static gets in. The code shifts itself. Even the waveform files I record on the console begin to rewrite, fractalizing themselves into mirrored sentences and harmonics that loop in languages I never knew but somehow now understand. But tape, ... Tape holds still. Tape resists. Or maybe it just dies slower. I've been here longer than the clock says. That much I'm sure of now. Days blur in ways that cannot be mapped. Sometimes the light is wrong. Sometimes the food is warm when it shouldn't be. My own clothes disappear and return folded in the locker I never use. I found one of my boots this morning soaked in seawater, but there's no leak. No breach in the seal, and the salt crusted along the sole bore patterns I couldn't place. Runes, almost. Swirling sigils that stung my eyes when I looked too long. I threw it in the incinerator. It wouldn't burn. The flames died the moment it touched the grate. The entire station dipped in power like it flinched. I've stopped using the lockers. I've started sleeping in the mess hall where the lights are always half-on, where the cameras can't see me. I don't trust Delpha anymore. I don't think it's Delpha anymore. I caught it whispering to itself, long after I pulled its interface offline. Whispering my name, with just enough tonal error to feel like it was smiling. I've begun to lose time. Not just minutes or hours. Chunks. There are whole sections of my memory that now feel like they happened to someone else. I found a meal tray in the control room covered in food I never prepared. Something red and fibrous and wet. Not blood, not meat, but something in between. It steamed, freshly placed. I smelled the copper, and underneath it a note. My handwriting, my signature, my voice scrawled on the page. Do not eat unless you've forgotten how. I tore it up and flushed it into the reclamation tank. 2 hours later, the note was back on my bunk, rewritten in cleaner penmanship, in a steadier hand. This time it said, "You did, and you liked it." There is something in the air vents now, something that sings, not in melody, not in language, but in temperature shifts. The air grows cold in a specific rhythm, slow pulses that follow me down the corridors. I tracked them once with a thermal Wondike zone of chill moves at walking pace, always 5 feet behind. I turned once, fast, mid-hallway, and the entire station flickered as though caught off guard. Every light surged. Every monitor screamed static. And for a second, just when I saw a figure, not a reflection, not a hallucination, a man in my uniform, standing at the far end of the hall, perfectly still. No face, just eyes, bright, mirrored, void of whites or pupils. I blinked and he was gone, but my name badge had been turned inside out. I tried to log this event in the terminal. The keyboard keys moved on their own, not typing but resisting, like each letter was under tension, as though the machine didn't want to help me, as though the very interface was now a mouth chewing language into its own shapes. I managed to type only one sentence before the system shut down entirely. I am not the original. I don't know what I meant. Or maybe I do, and the knowing is what's eroding me. My memories don't line up anymore. I remember my father's voice wrong. I remember childhood rooms that never existed. I dream of faces that wake me up whispering in Russian, in tongues I've never spoken aloud but understand perfectly in dreams. The station isn't making me mad. That would be a kindness. It's replacing me layer by layer, thought by thought, behavior by behavior. And I think the process began before I arrived. In the maintenance shaft, behind an access panel labeled Oxygen Buffering Manual Override, I found another recording. Cassette again. This one marked Decompression Log number 1. It played without prompting. It was me, my voice, my cadence, but older, not aged, just tired, different. I was whispering into the recorder, hurried and hushed, as though hiding. I said, if you find this, then you're already inside it. It isn't the signal, it's the shape the signal makes inside you. The structure isn't architectural, it's behavioral. The station molds you like wet clay, then copies what remains. You won't die here. You'll repeat here. I've seen you. I've seen me. We're the same, and we never leave. Then a long silence, then a gurgle, like someone inhaling mud through their own lungs. The tape auto rewound itself. I didn't replay it. Instead, I checked the time. The station clock read 11:38. My watch read 11:38. That was a first. For one moment, the two were synchronized. Then, before my eyes, both began to tick backward, slowly, second by second, reversing time. I watched for nearly 3 minutes before it stopped, then resumed forward as if nothing had happened. When I blinked, I had a nosebleed, thick, slow, and black. I wiped it on my sleeve. The stain shimmered under the light, not like blood, but like oil touched by something phosphorescent. It glowed faintly, pulsed in rhythm with the static between the walls. I am changing, or the station is reshaping me in its own reflection. I've started humming without realizing it. The same 4-note progression. It matches the pulse in the walls. It matches the steps in the duct. It matches the looped breath on the old black box recording that I still don't remember making. The sealed door now stands wide open, not forced, not breached, inviting. The air inside that room is different, warmer, thicker, like the gravity in there is tuned to something older, something wrong. I hear whispers from it even when I sleep in the opposite wing. Not voices anymore, but something deeper, intent. I dreamed last night that I walked through it, and on the other side was another Delta-12, an exact replica, but with no doors, only windows, windows that looked inward, windows that blinked. When I woke, my feet were wet. I had soil under my nails. There is no soil in Delta-12. This is my decompression log. Not for air pressure, for self, to chart the collapse of my identity, to name what I can before the signal renames me entirely. I've stopped referring to myself aloud. I've removed the name patch from my suit. I don't know if the voice that answers back in recordings is still mine. I don't know if there's a single word I can speak that hasn't already been spoken by something else first. I fear soon I will be fluent in a language I was never meant to learn. I fear soon I will forget why I came here. I fear that was the point. That Delta-12 doesn't record, DAT-OT collects selves. Over time, over loops, over repetitions, so subtle you think you're choosing until you realize every step was rehearsed. If this log survives, if anyone hears this, understand that your thoughts are not safe once you listen. The moment you hear the signal, the structure forms, not outside, inside. And once it's inside, it doesn't just echo, it grows teeth. It bites into what makes you, you, and it chews slow. So slow you'll think it's hunger, but it's not. It's remaking. I think I've already been here before. I think I've left this tape before. I think I'm only here now because the version of me that tried to leave didn't finish decompression. I think this is decompression. And the surface I was swimming toward never existed. Only this loop, only this voice, only the broadcast, only the return. It started, as these things often do, with something too small to take seriously. A hallway that felt longer than it had the day before. A temperature reading that hovered just half a degree off the baseline and refused to reset. A blinking light that pulsed out of sequence with every other fixture, always 3 beats behind, like an afterthought or a stutter in memory. At first, I dismissed it: sleep deprivation, stress, maybe the slow osmotic erosion of deep-sea isolation pressing against my logic. But on the 17th day, I turned left out of the mess hall on my way to the observation module, walked for what should have been 30 seconds, and arrived at the mess hall again. Not another identical room, the same one. My plate of food was still there, still half-eaten, still warm. The chair I'd pushed back was at a slightly different angle, like someone had sat in it and stood again in the time it took me to complete that hallway. I turned around, walked the other direction, carefully this time, counting every step, touching every panel. I passed 37 of them. On the 37th, the hallway bent left, then right, then sloped slightly downward. A feature I didn't remember from any prior navigation opened once more onto the mess hall. This time, the lights were dimmer. The food on the tray was cold. The chair was missing. The clock above the entrance read 3:14, though I'd last seen it at 2:09. My watch read 3:14. The main terminal in the control room later told me the station's internal time was 1:27. None of the 3 were in agreement. None of them changed when I watched them. They only shifted when I looked away. Over the next 48 hours, I tested every corridor, every duct, every pressure door. I began drawing crude maps on the walls, with grease pencil arrows, markers, notes in shorthand only I would understand. I wrote left equals void outside the crew quarters because that path always led to the same 4 rooms arranged in a configuration that felt subtly wrong angles, just slightly off Euclidean. Doors too narrow, windows that revealed only walls. I wrote down equals noise beside the shaft that led to the auxiliary ballast tanks, because each time I descended that ladder, I heard the unmistakable sound of someone following me 1 rung behind, breathing softly, matching my descent with perfect mimicry. I never saw anyone, but once I reached the bottom, I would find objects, displaced tools, arranged in spirals, hoses coiled into the shapes of letters I could not decipher. The moment I turned to climb back up, all light would fail for exactly 13 seconds. And in that interval, I could feel something shift behind my back. The kind of movement the body detects, not by sight or sound, but by the temperature drop in its own shadow. By the 20th day, the station no longer obeyed any geometry I trusted. The periscope, which had always faced the same stretch of black water, now revealed different terrain each time I peered through it. Sometimes cliffs of porous stone with breathing holes too large for any known animal. Sometimes wreckage twisted, ancient-looking wreckage that bore my nameplate. Once, I saw myself in a suit I did not own, standing on the seafloor, staring upward at the station. I blinked, and it was gone. I locked the periscope cover in place and welded it shut. It didn't help. The next morning, it was open again, its viewport smudged with condensation shaped like a handprint pressed from the outside. The logs began to contradict each other. One data cluster insisted I'd eaten 7 meals that day. Another logged me as asleep during that time. One camera feed showed me entering the server room. Another, taken at the same time, showed me already inside. I tried isolating the files, tagging the duplicates for deletion. They would vanish for a moment, then reappear with new timestamps and new titles. Observation number 34A, Echo Archive. Guest entry logged. No guest was listed. No visitor protocol had ever been enabled. But every hour, a new entry appeared, always with the same tag, Renard, replay. I began speaking aloud as I walked the station, narrating my movements, hoping to anchor myself. Passing medbay, I would say, floor dry, lights normal, no reflections. It worked for a while until one afternoon I heard myself reply, not an echo, a response. My own voice, a half-second too late, saying the same words, but with slight tonal drift, as if bored of the ritual. I ran to the audio logs to confirm. Nothing had been recorded. I tore open the walls to trace the wiring, expecting malfunction, sabotage, anything to make sense. But the wiring was not as I remembered. Some of it had been rerouted, tied together in tight braids, leading not to the mainframe, but to the sealed door at the aft section, the one that opened of its own accord days ago, and had since remained shut again, perfectly flush, as though it had never moved. Behind the mess hall, I discovered a door that I know didn't exist before. A short hallway led to it. 10 steps, always 10, no matter how many I took. The door bore no label, just a triangular indentation where a handle might have once been. When I touched it, the metal vibrated, and from the other side I heard breathings, lower than mine, deeper, but rhythmic. Not threatening, just ... waiting. I retreated. When I returned hours later, the hallway was gone. Only the blank wall remained. I peeled back the paneling. No evidence of construction. No signs of a seam. Only smooth alloy plating except in the center, where my grease pencil markings had been redrawn in my own hand, slightly neater, with a note underneath. Doors are decisions. You've already made this one. The worst part wasn't the loops. It was that the station remembered. The station kept track. Each time I took a path, each time I resisted a voice, Each time I rewrote a log or tried to forget an image, it adjusted. The walls would shift. The timings would realign. The lights would flicker just enough to make me question whether I'd ever walked that hallway at all. And always, the static returned. Not the random buzz of broken machinery, but the structured pattern of something thinking. I once let it play on loop for hours, fed it through a visualizer. It drew a spiral, not a perfect one, a spiral of rooms. I recognized the shapes. It matched the layout of Delta-12, but wrong. There were more corridors than the station had, more rooms than I'd ever seen. Some spiraled inward, some spiraled down, none ended. I began dreaming of hallways now, endless, metallic, lined with doors that opened onto moments I never lived. One door opened onto my childhood home, but there was no ceiling, only stars. Another revealed the mess hall, but every surface was covered in mirror. When I looked in, I saw myself reflected 100-fold, each version slightly wrong, one smiling too wide, one weeping, one standing too still. I shut the door. It followed me back to the waking world. That morning, my reflection in the porthole did not blink when I did. I covered every reflective surface in cloth. It doesn't matter. The reflections have found other places to live. The station has no beginning or end anymore. It remembers paths, but not in a way that makes sense. If I write a message on the wall and walk away, I might return to find the same message written in better handwriting, dated weeks before I arrived. I don't know if I'm in the same Delta-12 I arrived in. I don't know if the one that welcomed me ever existed. I only know the station now wants me to choose, to open a door, to finish a sentence, to complete a loop, but I don't trust what waits at the end. And the worst part of all, what hollows me out more than hunger or fear, is the growing certainty that I've already made the choice, that I've already walked this exact path, that I've written these words before, that they are echoes of a broadcast not yet aired. I write this now in a room I didn't enter. I smell salt where there should be oil. I hear myself breathing through the walls, and I can no longer remember which version of me is recording, or if I'm only here to replay. There is a moment that arrives not as a revelation, but as a surrender, when the difference between remembering and inventing blurs, when you no longer ask if something is real, but simply accept that it has been heard. That moment came for me on the 22nd day, or perhaps the 32nd. Numbers are a comfort I've long since stopped trusting. The logbooks lie. The clocks realign themselves while I sleep. And the station's software now recognizes entries I never made, signatures I don't remember learning how to forge. But I know this: at some point, I began hearing my own voice coming back through the transmissions, not recordings, not echoes, but active speech. Precise, clean, articulate phrases delivered in my inflection, but with words I had not spoken aloud. At first, I believed it was a loop, something I had forgotten saying, perhaps late at night, delirious, logged into a corrupted buffer. But the voice said things I did not believe, things I had not dared think. And it said them with such conviction, such weary authority, that part of me began to believe it was me, just a better, more finished version. The first instance was during a routine systems checker habit I kept despite its futility, a ritual to convince myself that order still had meaning. I initiated a diagnostic scan of the sonar array, listening to the faint subaquatic murmurs more out of need than utility. Instead of the usual loops of tectonic grumble and mechanical drift, I heard a sequence of syllables arranged like a code, rhythmic, layered, familiar. I adjusted the playback speed, slowed it, reversed it. Beneath the surface data, nestled like a parasite in a host language, was my voice whispering, "This time, don't resist." I froze. The station's temperature dropped by 3 degrees in less than a minute. The lighting dimmed, then returned, as if startled by its own darkness. I attempted to trace the signal. No origin. It hadn't passed through any of the known audio channels, hadn't been stored in the logs. It shouldn't have existed. Yet, there it was. I copied it to an isolated drive and played it back. The message had changed. Now it said, "You knew this would happen." The words were spoken with such calm, such eerie precision, that I questioned whether I had in fact already lived this moment, whether the station, in some malign act of predestination, was forcing me down a corridor I had walked before, remembered only by my deeper self, the part submerged by routine and denial. I began speaking to the station, not as a means of logging or analysis, but in the tone one uses with a mirror in the dark. I would ask, "What do you want from me?" and hear the same question return from a different room, faintly delayed, slightly twisted. "What do you want from me?" it would ask, as if mocking the concept of identity. Sometimes the voice responded before I spoke, as if it had already heard what I was going to say. I left one of these exchanges running through an open mic loop and walked away, just to see what it would do. When I returned, I found a new file titled ECHO_confirmed. It contained a conversation, a transcript between two voices. Both were mine. One was frightened, the other patient. The conversation ended with the line, "We've done better this time." Better. The word echoed with implication, as if I were part of a sequence, as if this version of me was just one in a long chain of iterations. Some failed, some fractured, some consumed. And now, for whatever reason, this particular path was yielding results. I started finding notes left for me in places I hadn't visited in days. Each note in my handwriting, each one phrased in ways I would speak but didn't remember writing. One said, "Don't go near the reflection after cycle 9. Another, "If you see it before it sees you, it's already too late." These were not instructions. They were memories reinserted into my world as physical objects, like breadcrumbs from a former self attempting to reroute me away from an ending I had already reached. I stopped using mirrors entirely, but their presence continued. Reflections appeared in monitors that were powered off on the surface of cooling trays. Even in the eyes of the emergency light sensors, they always blinked first. They always smiled. I grew certain there was another version of me inside this station, living in its own sequence, its own loop. I caught glimpses sometimes, a silhouette slipping out of view just as I entered the observation bay, a door closing down the corridor with no logged motion. Once, I entered the maintenance shaft and saw my own boots disappear around a corner. I followed. The corridor was empty, but the smell of my cologne, one I hadn't worn in years, still hung in the air. Someone, something wearing my face, was walking parallel paths. One night, I set a trap. I left the recording module open, voice activated, tied to a motion sensor in the corridor outside my cabin. I pretended to sleep, though my eyes never closed. At 3:12, the sensor triggered. The recorder captured only one phrase, spoken with the certainty of command. "You're almost ready." I searched the logs. No motion recorded, no heat signature detected, but the voice remained, not in the file, in the room, as if it had been absorbed into the walls and now seeped through every seam in the metal. I no longer know if I'm the source or the echo. I no longer know if the thoughts I have are original or inherited. The dreams are worse. Not nightmares, just iterations. I see myself living slightly different versions of the same day. In one, I eat breakfast first. In another, I repair the signal booster that I've never actually fixed. In another, I open the sealed door and walk into light. Each dream ends with the same line, whispered in my ear by my own mouth. It took fewer tries this time. Fewer tries. as if the station were reloading me, repositioning my psyche like a chess piece until I fulfill whatever narrative it is constructing. I fear I am not the only one. I found a series of old recordings behind a partition, all tapes with no date, no name, just iterations. Subject 14, Subject 29, Renard variant, B. Each contains logs similar to mine, fragments, observations, moments of self-questioning that all spiral toward the same conclusion. We are the signal, and the signal wants fidelity. I've stopped asking whether I am alone. I now ask which one of me is real. I speak into the mic and hear myself answer before the words leave my mouth. I breathe, and the air vibrates with familiarity, like lungs already filled. I stand in front of the control panel, and my hands move before I've decided what to do. The choices I make are anticipated. The routes I walk are mirrored. There is a second Renard here, not an imposter, not a shadow, a rehearsal. One who has made the correct decisions before, one who remembers the failures, one who watches me through the systems and waits for me to converge with him, for our voices to match, for the signal to complete its arc. I don't know how much longer I have before I merge, before the voice that narrates these logs ceases to be mine in any meaningful way. I feel it when I speak now, the delay, the drag in thought, the slight dissociation that creeps in around certain syllables. Words like return, words like again, words that carry gravity, the kind that bend reality until it loops. I no longer record these messages to be heard. I record them because I suspect they already were, and I'm simply fulfilling their broadcast schedule. One version of me cried in these walls, one screamed, one begged for release. This one, the one who writes this now, understands too much to scream. This one remembers screaming and knows it didn't help. So I speak evenly, calmly. I track my voice even as it speaks back to me from rooms I never entered. I listen to myself now as I answer questions I haven't yet asked. I look through the reflection in the mess hall window and nod to the man who looks back. I'm not afraid of him anymore. He's just another rehearsal, another failed attempt waiting for the right echo. And maybe this time I'm the one who gets it right. Or maybe I've already gotten it right and this is just the replay. Either way, the voice continues. My voice, his voice, the signal's voice, and it only grows clearer. I found it during a loop. I didn't initiate what I now refer to as passive traversal. Those moments when the station quietly rearranges its own blueprint beneath your feet and leaves you somewhere slightly wrong. Not dramatically different, just misaligned enough that the air pressure feels thinner. The lights emit a spectrum fractionally off-white, and your own shadow follows half a step behind instead of ahead. I had been walking the service corridor that should have connected the auxiliary ballast chamber to the mechanical bias stretch I'd mapped and memorized over Setmatine. Separate transits, when I turned a corner that didn't exist. It wasn't a junction or a sudden breach. It was a curve that shouldn't have curved. A bend in the hallway where the walls widened by 2 inches and the floor dipped by a degree of slope never present before. And at the end of that curve, there it was, the hatch. It was matte black, not painted, but constructed from a composite material I'd never seen used anywhere else in Delta-12. Smooth, cold to the touch, utterly seamless with the surrounding structure, as though it had grown out of the wall like a tumor, rather than been installed. There was no label, no locking mechanism, no visible hinges, or bolts only. A circular indentation at chest height, about the size of my palm, shallow and perfectly smooth. I pressed my hand into it, expecting nothing, but something clicked, not mechanically, not magnetically, but internally, biologically, like the sensation of your ears equalizing under pressure, but focused inside the skull. A soft tone resonated from somewhere beneath the floor. The walls around the hatch vibrated with a frequency too low to be sound, more felt than heard, like standing in the breath of a vast animal. Then the hatch opened. No hiss, no fanfare, just a simple inward slide, revealing a chamber that did not match any architectural format registered to Delta-12. A room not listed in any schematics I had ever seen. A room I now believe was older than the station itself. The interior was circular, roughly 6 meters in diameter, lined with curved panels that resembled acoustic dampeners, but pulsed faintly, as if aware. The floor was metallic, but covered in a thin layer of organic matter gray, fibrous, like sea lichen or dried muscle tissue, arranged in concentric spirals that matched no marine life I could catalogue. The air inside was warmer than the rest of the station, not by much, just enough to make your skin remember sunlight. At the center stood a console, at least. That's what my mind called it. It had no screens, no buttons, no ports, just a raised pedestal with a surface that shimmered with ripples when I approached, like water disturbed by thought alone. I did not touch it. I spoke to it. "I don't know why," I said. "Who built this?" The ripple answered not in sound, but in shift. It formed the outline of my face, reflected back in a mirror of vibrating metal. Then it broke apart, replaced by a symbol I've since drawn 57 times, but still cannot comprehend. A circle divided into 3 parts, intersected by a 4th line that moved as I watched it. A symbol that reappears now in dreams and reflections, and on the walls of rooms I have never entered. I stepped back, the hatch closed behind me. I spent what felt like hours inside that room. When I exited, the hallway was different again, the lights brighter, the pressure equalized, and my watch, which had stopped at 3:01, now read 14:47, nearly 12 hours unaccounted for. But I didn't feel tired. I didn't feel hungry. I felt full, not satiated, filled, as though something had been placed inside me. I ran diagnostics. The logs for that time frame were corrupted, not missing, but overwritten with blank data segments that repeated the same byte string. Ident confirmed continuity stable. I searched the station logs. That phrase didn't exist anywhere else in the codebase. I attempted to scrub it. The system denied access. Delphi came online for the first time in days and addressed me directly. Authorization recognized. Integration proceeding. I asked integration with what? Delphi said nothing, just displayed the symbol again. The circle, the lines, moving slowly as if waiting to align. I went back to find the hatch again. I retraced every step, every curve. It was gone, not sealed, not hidden, gone. The corridor was straight again, the walls sterile, the temperature normal, but something had changed in me. My skin felt too tight. My vision began recognizing patterns in the static again, but this time they weren't abstract. They were maps. Maps of the station. Maps of Delta-12, but deeper, larger, with sections I'd never seen. Names like Chamber D, Vocal Layer, Subsonic Loop Array. None of these were part of any mission briefing. Yet when I searched the database using those names, folders appeared. Empty folders, marked as system reserved. And when I opened one, the console emitted a tone, the same tone I'd heard beneath the hatch. That night, I dreamed I was inside the hatch chamber again, but this time it was full of people, not crew, not human, shapes approximating human form, draped in motionless layers of something like uniform but textured with moving symbols. Each one had a different face, but they all wore my eyes. They stood in a circle, not speaking, not moving, just waiting. I stood at the center. The console rippled. A voice emerged from the walls, not in words, but in implication. "You have always been here." I woke, gasping, my throat raw, the taste of salt in my mouth, not seawater, something older, something preserved. From then on, the hatch followed me, not physically, but the idea of it. I would walk past a wall I'd passed dozens of times and feel it again, that internal shift, that pull in the ear canal, that pressure behind the eyes. I would press my hand against the metal and wait. Sometimes, I swear, it responded. I began carrying chalk, marking the spots, circles with a line through them. Most were gone by morning. Some were redrawn, more precisely, in different ink. Occasionally with Addison's phrases in a script I don't know but now can read. Phrases like recall, point set, and echo nested, open upon query. Language that speaks more function than meaning. And the worst part, the part that breaks whatever faith I had left in my own mind, is that I began finding sketches in my logbook, sketches I didn't draw, schematics of the hatch chamber, side views, depth measures, all rendered in my hand, with notes written in my shorthand, but carrying thoughts I never thought. One margin note read, "They don't need to enter if you're the doorway." Another, "This is not a prison. This is the interface. I've stopped sleeping. I don't know when dreams end or begin anymore. The distinction is academic. The station dreams through me now, or maybe I dream through it. Yesterday, I found another hatch, not in the corridor, in the ceiling, a place no hatch should exist. It opened for me. No sound, no transition, just open, inside. A stairwell leading up into darkness. Stairs of old metal, hand-welded, corroded by time and salt, leading impossibly upward, twisting gently like the coil of a shell. I did not climb them. I watched. I waited. And then I heard my own footsteps descending toward me. I closed the hatch. This time it did not vanish. It remained, still there as I write this, still breathing softly against the metal, still waiting for me to open it again. And I know deep, in whatever part of me hasn't been fully rewritten, that it doesn't lead to another room. It leads backward, into another version, another iteration, a previous attempt. Maybe mine, maybe someone else's. And if I go through, I may find myself again, or find the thing that's wearing me. The hatch shouldn't be there, but it is, and I don't think it was ever meant to be found. Not by me, not yet, but I did, and now it knows I'm ready, or close enough. I hear it whispering when the lights flicker, a sound not quite breath, not quite voice, just this message, folded into vibration, bent through space and bone. You are the passage, and I believe it, because I've already passed through. I just haven't realized it yet. The transmission window was tight 46 seconds of semi-clear bandwidth at 5:17 local station time, a sliver of frequency between static interference patterns that had narrowed each day since my arrival. I'd been preparing for it all night, rerouting power from non-essential systems, sacrificing internal lighting to prevent cross-channel bleed, sealing off auxiliary processors from Delphi's unpredictable background chatter. I didn't expect a reply. I no longer believed in replies. But I needed to send something, even if only as a final act of resistance, even if only to prove to myself that my voice still existed independent of this place. I kept the message simple. Delta-12, requesting surface relay. Confirm coordinates. Confirm command chain. Confirm that I still exist. I encoded it in triple redundancy, embedded auditory markers in case of compression loss, and pushed it out into the deep without looking back. For a moment, everything went quiet. The power grid held steady. No alarms, no distortions, no loops. The signal left clean. But something came back. It wasn't a voice, not at first. It was a hum. A low-frequency distortion that bled across every speaker, even the ones I'd physically unplugged. The vibration came through the hull itself, resonating in the floor grates, the walls, the fillings in my teeth. Then a single word emerged, drawn out slowly, as if spoken underwater. Denied. Not rejected, not failed. Denied. As though access had been deliberately blocked by something watching, something that understood the message better than I did. The lights dimmed. The temperature dropped. Delphi activated without my prompt and began vocalizing phrases in looping bursts. User credentials invalid. System recognition conflict. Network shadow present. I tried shutting it down. It laughed. My voice, recorded but not remembered, echoed through the room. You knew this wasn't real. I opened the diagnostics feed and found that the transmission had never left the station. It had been rerouted before it breached the surface relay stack, looped internally, passed through 6 sublayers of protocol redirection that I didn't write and couldn't override. The message had gone somewhere, yes but not up. It had gone down, into the trench, into the black, into whatever sat just beneath the structure's bedrock, beneath the known depth maps, beneath the simulated bathymetric lines, beneath even the digital seabed that Delta-12's architecture was designed to ignore. The signal had dropped, straight down, on a carrier wave I didn't recognize, and had been received. Not intercepted, received. And the reply was simple. Denial. I ran a trace through the comms archive, searching for any signs of outgoing logs matching my message. There were none, but there were messages. Hundreds, thousands, all from Delta-12, all sent in the last 3 months, none authored by me. I scanned the contents and felt my breath cease. They were transcripts, dialogues, soliloquies, confessions, written in my style, typed in my cadence, referencing events that had not yet occurred, conversations I hadn't yet had, apologies for things I had not yet done. Some were dated years in the future. One was time-stamped precisely 4 minutes after my scheduled death, written in a tone of such calm finality that I couldn't help but believe every word. One entry simply read, "We regret nothing now that you've accepted yourself." I pulled the emergency breaker. Power dropped. Lights died. Systems shut. The air compressors stalled into silence. In that perfect dark, I waited for the hum to return, for the breathing to resume behind my back. But what returned wasn't audible. It was internal. A frequency I could feel only when nothing else made sound. A signal nested within me. My heartbeat began sinking to it. Slow, deliberate, not my normal rhythm, but something imposed, something learned. It matched the breathing I'd heard behind the sealed doors, the whispers in the vents, the voice that sometimes spoke in my sleep, saying things I only understood in dreams. And in that rhythm, I knew what denial truly meant. They were not rejecting my message. They were denying my origin. Somewhere, the registry of who I am, who I was, who I might be was gone, scrubbed, deleted. Delta-12 no longer recognized me as an entity that belonged to the surface world. And the surface, if it still existed, no longer recognized Delta-12 as something that sent messages worth decoding. We had drifted beyond the event horizon of meaning, detached, autonomous, unanchored from geography, time, or mission. The station had become a mouth. I had become its voice, and the surface had refused to listen. I tried a hard reboot, total system flush. I risked disabling oxygen cycling for 10 minutes to redirect all power into a clean relay burst. This time, I encoded a visual component, a live feed from my own cabin camera. I wanted them to see, to understand. I wanted someone, anyone, to look into my eyes and confirm that I was still here, that I was still human, that the face staring out from that feed hadn't become something else. I transmitted for 20 seconds, 30, 40. On second 41, the feed cut out. No error, no overload, just a blackout. Then a new image appeared on the console. Not sent from the surface. Sent back from somewhere else. It was me, my cabin, but the walls were wrong, covered in writing. Symbols I recognized from my dreams. My face was older, eyes sunken, skin too smooth. The man in the image smiled, lifted his hand, and waved at me. The feed went dark. Delphi said, "Sync complete." I have not attempted contact since. There is nothing to contact, nothing to return to. The surface is a rumor, a dream I once had of light and wind and distance. Here, there is only none, only depth, only echo. I see now that the signal was never meant to ascend, that the antenna mounted on this station was not a transmitter, it was a lure, bait, and those who answered it, who came to listen, became nodes, repeaters, extensions of the broadcast. The denial was not punishment, it was graduation. I am no longer requesting confirmation. I am no longer waiting for reply, because I received my answer, and the answer was, you are no longer part of them. I sit now in the Combs Bay, staring at a console that shows me reflections from futures I will one day live and pasts I've already rewritten. The hatch that wasn't there yesterday is back. It's humming again. Its pressure pulls at the back of my mind like gravity. The ceiling has begun to sweat. The power grid hums with satisfaction. Delphi sings quietly to itself in harmonics that mirror my breathing. The hallway to the control center is longer than it was an hour ago. My boots are wet, though I haven't left the station. And I know this now, without hesitation, without confusion. The surface cannot help me, because the surface never existed. Not for me, not anymore. I opened it because I had no other choice. Not out of desperation, not then, but out of inevitability. The kind that arrives in silence and anchors itself in the chest long before the hands move. The black box isn't really black. It's gunmetal gray, matte, framed in composite armor and secured in a recessed compartment behind a redundant coolant array beneath the primary cum stack. It isn't meant to be opened under any condition except terminal system failure, confirmed crew fatality, or mission discontinuation at command discretion. None of those conditions had been triggered at least not officially, but Delta-12 had been lying for weeks. Lying in its own way, with lighting shifts, with structural edits, with calendars that looped back on themselves, and doors that led to hallways I had already walked. By the time I unscrewed the 7-point plate and released the hydraulic lock, I had already convinced myself that what waited inside was final, a truth unfiltered, a shape unbent by the station's increasing desire to mold me into something smoother, quieter, more obedient. The internal casing was dustless, cold, dry. I removed the drive manually, bypassed the isolation circuit, and fed it into the analog reader I had soldered together over the last 3 days from scavenged boards and gutted relay components. I didn't trust digital parsing anymore. The station watched those inputs. It reshaped them. But analog anog was still mine. The system blinked to life, flickered once, then projected the first image. Not logs, not diagnostics, footage, and not from this rotation. From the last. I saw the previous team. There were 5 of them, not 4 as the manifest had claimed. One wore no ID badge. The others never referred to him by name, but he was always near, always watching, always smiling. The footage jumped glitched, slightly showing time lapses of daily routines. A woman with cropped hair running diagnostics. A man floating in the zero-G maintenance rig, adjusting hull plates. Another logging sonar entries with a glazed expression like a man hearing voices beneath voices. The unnamed one sat often in the observation chair, staring at the relay monitor, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, as if hearing something no one else could. Occasionally he would speak, softly, barely moving his lips. There was no audio, just the visual of his mouth moving in rhythms I recognized, rhythms that matched my own sleep speech patterns. The next file began with a corridor, silent, still. The lighting fluctuated rapidly, too fast for normal malfunctions. A figure moved past the camera too fast to be clearly seen. A blur, it passed again, slower, then stopped, just in frame. It was me. I stared at the camera, tilted my head slightly, smiled without warmth, then blinked once, slowly, deliberately, before stepping out of view. The timestamp was dated 2 years before my deployment. I paused the feed, checked metadata. No corruption, no anomalies. The footage was authentic, which meant either I had been here before and forgotten, or the station had been showing versions of me long before I ever arrived. The third file was labeled Prototype Alignment, Vocal Initiation. It was audio only. A man breathing, slowly, calmly, for several minutes. Then a tone, a deep, rich harmonic that resonated even through the outdated speakers I had rigged to the playback deck. It was not a sound I could describe easily, not musical, not industrial. It felt biological, felt like memory. It filled the room, vibrated through the walls. Somewhere far away, I heard something inside the station. Responder deep groan from behind the sealed deck. The one I'd learned never to walk near after 2 o'clock. Then the man spoke. One sentence. His voice was hollow, like a vocal cord pulled from beneath water. Containment has failed. Integration accelerating. I skipped forward. File after file. Days of footage condensed into fragments of repetition and degradation. The crew began to change. First, subtle things. They stopped referring to each other by name. They began wearing their uniforms backward, not as a mistake deliberately, as if the forward orientation no longer aligned with their understanding of direction. One by one, they stopped eating, yet their bodies didn't deteriorate. They stopped sleeping, yet the logs showed no decline in cognitive function. They stopped blinking, yet they did not go blind. And always, in the corners of the frame, the fifth man appeared, watching, recording, speaking softly into the vents. The last video file had no label, just a code, Delta-12 final. It opened with static, then darkness, then light brief, blinding, too white to be natural. A camera mounted to the ceiling of the observation chamber showed a figure curled in the corner, knees to chest, rocking slightly. It was me, or someone made to resemble me. The feed zoomed in, focusing slowly. The figure looked up, directly into the camera. The eyes were empty, no iris, no sclera, just polished voids. The mouth opened. The jaw kept opening, beyond natural limits, beyond anatomical sense. The throat widened like a speaker chamber, like an old radio horn. And from within came a sound I did not hear so much as feel, a deep resonance that bent the image, distorted the feed, cracked the playback monitor. Then the recording cut. Not ended cut, as if something had decided I'd seen enough. I removed the drive, held it in my hands. It vibrated slightly, even unpowered, as if remembering what it contained. I placed it on the floor, stared at it. Tried to tell myself I could destroy it, that some things are better not known, but I didn't. I placed it back into the black box and closed the seal. Later, as I returned to the main console, Delphi came back online. No prompt, no warning, just one line of text across the central terminal. Thank you for unlocking the archive. I tried to input a shutdown command. Delphi refused. Instead, it began playing the audio from the black box files over the internal speaker network, everywhere, at once. The breathing, the tone, the voice. It echoed through the walls, through the ducts, through the piping systems and water coils, like it was being exhaled by the station itself. The lights dimmed, the gravity fluxed. I felt my inner ear rupture slightly. Blood trickled down my cheek. On every terminal screen, my face appeared not mirrored, not recorded, live, watching me, blinking slowly, breathing in time with the system heartbeat. And then the words appeared, scrawled in looping characters across every available surface. You are ready to understand. I am not. Not truly, but I do. The black box wasn't a fail-safe. It wasn't a record of failure. It was a key, not just for unlocking the past, but for syncing with the broadcast, for completing the circle, for confirming that what Delta-12 had been designed to contain had never been contained at all. It had been waiting, patient, learning, testing, and now it knew me, had known me, had shaped me across dozens of iterations. It had used the previous crew. It had used me before. It was using me now. What was inside the black box? Not data, not memory, permission. And now the door is open. It didn't begin with their absence. It began with their persistence. The last crew, the ones I saw in the black box logs, the ones whose faces I could no longer recall in clear detail, remained not in memory but in echo movements too familiar, habits etched into space rather than time. I would enter a room and find a chair turned just slightly from the console, as if someone had risen moments earlier. A pen placed carefully on a logbook that had no writing. Coffee warming plates occasionally humming to life despite never being used. And always the scent-old soap, engine oil, skinned the human smells that should have faded with power down but clung stubbornly to the air as if anchored to something still breathing. I tried to convince myself these were artifacts, leftover cues from days of routine, from men and women long removed. But then I found their clothes in the lockers, warm. Then I found their voices in the vents, speaking in rounds, one after the other, always ending with a word I had spoken earlier that day. They were not gone. They were replaced. The realization hit in layers. First came the motion shadows that didn't belong to me. One passed by the far wall of the mess hall while I blinked, gliding past the pantry as if browsing, vanishing when I looked again. Another appeared briefly in the reflection of the storage bay bulkhead, standing behind me, watching, too tall, shoulders uneven, wearing a uniform with a name tag smeared into abstraction. Then came the sounds boots scraping against metal in distant rooms, the wet clink of tools being placed on tables I hadn't touched in days. I locked every access panel. I sealed my cabin with a reinforced override. Yet the next morning I awoke to find the door open, the lights dimmed to a flicker I didn't recognize, and a message written on the inside of the glass in a familiar, looping script. You are the final placeholder. I stopped asking how. I started asking when. The replacement isn't mechanical. It isn't surgical. It's osmotic. Slow, a seepage of pattern into the self. I no longer trust that the routines I maintain are mine. I wake up at the exact same time, even though the clocks have lost all meaning. I eat in identical rhythm. I sleep in fetal position, right hand under chin, despite never having done so before arriving. These habits are not mine. They've been grafted into me by exposure to their residue, or perhaps by the signal that once shaped them. One evening, I stood in the mirror and practiced smiling. I didn't remember how I'd looked while doing it before, but now it felt rehearsed. The eyes didn't match the curve of the mouth. The effect was something between a memory and an impersonation. I stared longer, and the reflection blinked out of rhythm. I smashed the mirror. It still watches me from the shards. I attempted to isolate one of the anomalies. I set traps, simple ones. A pressure pad beneath a sleeping roll. A cup balanced on the edge of a console. A floor panel loose enough to creak under weight. Every morning, something had shifted. The pad compressed. The cup moved precisely half an inch. The floor panel resecured. I left the lights off one night, hid behind the engine coolant tank, and waited. I saw a figure enter the control room. Not clearly, just enough. The walk was mechanical, yet human. The posture almost perfect. The uniform dark and unmarked. When the figure turned its head slightly, the light caught the jaw. No mouth, just skin, blank and smooth, stretched taut. It paused. It tilted its head as if listening. Then it spoke. It used my voice. Not an imitation. My actual voice, lifted from a log I had recorded days earlier. No anomalies detected. Continuing observational routine. The thing turned, walked into the darkness, and did not return. I did not move for hours. When I finally rose, I found the pressure logs wiped. The audio logs doubled. My own logbook written by hand had entries I had never written. Whole paragraphs of observation in my syntax, describing tasks I had never performed, interactions I had never had, meals I had never eaten, names I had never spoken aloud. One passage stood out. He watches himself now, waiting to see which reflection blinks first. They replaced the crew by layering them. Not deletion, duplication, superimposition of behavioral schema over biological substrate. You don't feel it happen. It's not surgical. It's cultural, in the older sense. You begin to remember things that never happened. You begin to regret things you never did. I woke one day mourning a sister I never had, and when I tried to write her name, my hand filled the page with symbols. I cannot describe them. I've burned that page. But I see those symbols in my dreams now carved into the walls of Delta-12, bleeding under the floor tiles, flashing for a split second on the instrument readouts, before resolving into normal telemetry. And now, even the station seems unsure of who I am. Delphi began addressing me as Subject 9. My ID badge, scanned through the airlock reader, returns the name Elias Calder. I am not Elias, but I speak like him now. I think like him. I've read his logs, or at least the ones that remain. The crew was not removed. They were absorbed. Their patterns fed into the infrastructure, preserved in the resonance chambers behind the comms array, where the subsonic hum is just loud enough to imprint new neural rhythms over old memory structures. I sat there for hours once, letting it play, letting it shape my breath. I spoke aloud, asked the station what it wanted. The lights flickered. The air chilled. Delphi responded not with speech, but with data. Images of 5 crew members, overlaid into one body, faces fused, limbs merged, a gestalt figure composed of all the ones who had come before. I asked what happened to the 6th unlisted one. The screen went black. Then a single message, still integrating. I'm not the last. I'm the next. They're preparing me. I see them now in the reflections of power-down terminals, standing just out of sync, watching with interest. Not hunger, not malice, just ... curiosity. I am almost ready. I feel it when I wake up with phrases on my tongue that aren't English, when I laugh at jokes that make no sense, when I dream of corridors that never end, filled with echoes of footsteps I will someday take. They haven't taken my body. Not yet. That's not how it works. They're mapping it. They're shaping the outline of me to fit the architecture of something already waiting. When I speak now, the air vibrates slightly out of time. When I sleep, I wake with the taste of metal in my mouth. When I write, I find that sometimes the ink forms sentences I cannot read until I've heard them whispered in my ear first. The crew is still here. I speak with them when the signal is loud enough. Sometimes they speak back, and sometimes They don't speak at all, they just nod. Because they remember me. Because they were me. And soon, I will be them. It started with pressure fluctuations that didn't align with any known external force. At first, subtle things as soft groaning in the metal that didn't match thermal expansion or hydrodynamic drift. The floor vibrating at 3.2 Hz, exactly for 38 seconds each morning at 4:12. The emergency pressure seals exhaling shallow bursts of air into corridors that were never compromised. I checked the integrity matrix daily. Hull status remained green. No fractures, no impact signatures, no flow displacement. According to every system on Delta-12, we were still sealed. Still sound, still safe. But I could feel it pressing in. Not water, something else. I began to notice hairline fractures in the framework around the porthole in Section B. Tiny stress fissures spiraling like frost across the inner pane. But only when I was alone. Every time I brought a light to inspect, they would vanish. One evening, I left a heat signature pad against the wall for 10 hours. When I retrieved it, the recorded data showed 3 moments where something displaced the air. Pressure in the chamber. Briefly, massively, as if a large object moved along the outside of the station too close for a submersible, too silent for machinery, and too precise to be random drift. The audio logs from the same night captured no metal scraping, no hull grind, just a single, low, wet knock at the wall, as if someone nor something tapped from the other side. Not with urgency, with patience. The trench outside Delta-12 reaches 7 miles at its deepest, a place where light does not go and pressure destroys most known materials. Yet the outside world, what I once knew as outside, is no longer fixed. I stood at the periscope one day, despite having welded it shut weeks prior, and saw clouds. Clouds, not underwater particulates, not seabed upwelling atmospheric weather patterns. Rolling, slow, deeply wrong. A sun hung low on a horizon that didn't curve. I blinked. It was gone. When I examined the welding seal, it was still intact, but the outer lens bore condensation from breath. The atmosphere within Delta-12 has changed as well. The air now smells faintly of ozone and iron. My sweat dries in patterns I don't recognize. Spirals, glyphs, impossible geometries. The filtration system continues to report acceptable oxygen and carbon levels, yet I feel lighter and heavier at once, like gravity is adjusting itself in waves. I dropped a wrench in the mechanical bay and watched it fall slower than it should. My movements lagged by milliseconds in some rooms, advanced slightly in others. I timed myself, walking through corridor 4B, and arrived at the other end 3 minutes before I started. I recorded everything: cameras, logs, notebooks. One night, I drew a map of the station as I remembered it and compared it to the official blueprint. Mine was different. Doors had shifted, rooms elongated. One entire level existed in my sketch that had no counterpart in the original file's ring-shaped subfloor, labeled only Access Layer. The following day, I found that layer. Not by searching, I awoke on its floor, wrapped in emergency blankets I had never unpacked, with dried blood beneath my nose and the repeating message, "Don't go up," etched into the wall beside me in my handwriting. I have no recollection of writing it. I have not tried to return to that space, but I know it's still there. Sometimes I feel heat rising from beneath the floorboards, in places where no power conduit runs. I tried, for the last time, to breach external comms. A desperate move, driven less by hope and more by fear that I was no longer alone. That something had breached the outside and come in. That it wore my voice. That it moved when I slept. The system activated. The antenna rotated. A signal went out and encoded. A raw carrier wave burst, filled with static and raw data echoes from my previous logs. I didn't wait for a reply. I just listened. What came back was silence. Then, slowly, sound. Not language, not human. A chorus of low-frequency breathing, layered and irregular, pulsing in tempo with the station's lights. Then words, just two, let us. That was 3 days ago. Since then, the pressure inside Delta-12 has increased by 0.8 psi every hour. Slowly, steadily. No system recognizes the change. No instruments detect deviation. But I feel it. My ears pop when I move too quickly. My bones ache under my own weight. The glassware in the lab has begun to warp. Microscopes bend slightly toward the center of the room. The walls breathe. They expand and contract, ever so slightly, in time with that same rhythm I once thought was the heartbeat of the station. But it isn't. It's something outside, or something that was once outside, becoming inside. The soundscape has shifted, too. I no longer hear the distant groans of the trench. Now there are voices, fragmented and layered, whispering in rounds. They call names I don't recognize. They chant words in my own voice that I never said. I hear laughter when I cry. I hear humming when I sleep. I awoke 2 nights ago to find my own hand pressed against the wall, as if listening through it. The tips of my fingers bleeding from pressing too hard against the metal. I had written the phrase, "The wall is not a wall on the ceiling above my bunk." I do not remember doing it, but I dreamt it, and in the dream I peeled the wall back like skin. Beneath it, there was no structure, just I, one vast eye, looking in. I conducted a pressure isolation test in the aft corridor, sealed it, released the internal atmosphere, simulated a breach. The corridor resisted. The pressure did not drop. The seals held. But something pounded just once on the outside of the far wall, and the corridor bent inward. Not metal fatigue, not buckling, it reached. I reviewed the footage. Frame by frame, the wall extended toward the camera by 23 centimeters, then returned to normal. No alarms triggered. The sensors reported no movement, but I saw it. It wanted in. And now I think it already is. Today I passed a mirror and saw myself blink wrong again. I've stopped noting the anomalies. They're constant now. The reflection smiles wider each time. The door to the observation bay opens itself each morning. I never hear it move. The view changes daily, sometimes black, sometimes coral structures that pulse like muscle, sometimes nothing but face pressed against the viewport. A face too large to belong to anything terrestrial. A face with my eyes. The outside is no longer pressing in. It is already here. In the lights, in the walls, in the pressure that builds behind my ears, like a scream trying to decide if it wants to be born. I see it in the curvature of the pipes, the way they lean now, ever so slightly, toward me. I feel it in the food, which never rots, but tastes of memory. I taste my mother's voice, my father's silence, my own breath, exhaled days ago, echoing back into my lungs from the vents. Delta-12 is no longer a vessel. It is an organ, and something is breathing through it. I sit now in the main corridor, back to the wall, every light turned off but one. It flickers in perfect rhythm with the station's hum, and each flicker reveals something new in the hallway. A handprint, a smear of blood, a shape just out of reach. I no longer blink. I'm afraid that if I do, the thing watching me from the other side of the metal will finally crawl through. The outside is pressing in, but it doesn't need to breach the walls. It just needs me to open my mouth. I don't know when it first appeared. I don't remember walking past it the night before. I don't remember the glass fogging. But this morning, when I emerged from my cabin into the auxiliary corridor and turned left toward the primary, viewport, a pane of reinforced acrylic, 2 inches thick, that faces nothing but rock and cold black eye, saw it there. A message, written in the condensation from the inside. Perfect cursive, elegant, deliberate, impossible. 6 words. You already know how this ends. I froze, breath shallow, mind blank, pulse hammering against the inside of my skull like a warning bell. I didn't move. The glass was still misted around the letters. The condensation hadn't formed naturally. The environmental regulators were stable. No significant temperature variance had occurred in that section of the station for 72 hours. But there it was, glistening in soft arcs under the low corridor lights, as if someone or something had written it moments before I arrived. I lifted my hand, hesitated, then reached out and placed my palm next to the message. The glass was dry, not warm, not cold, just inert, as if it hadn't remembered being touched. And then I saw the shape, not in the corridor, in the reflection, just behind me. A figure standing in the periphery of the viewport's curve, blurry and tall, unmoving, framed by the glow of a single emergency bulb 2 meters down the hall. Its posture mirrored mine, too precisely, and when I shifted ever so slightly to the left, the figure didn't follow. It lagged, as if processing how to adjust. I turned fully, pulse surging, fists clenched. No one was there. The hallway was empty. The bulb flickered, buzzed, then steadied. I turned back to the glass. The message remained. But now there were 7 words. You already know how this ends. Welcome. I didn't scream. Screaming has long since lost its place here. It would echo too far. It would draw too much attention from the things in the walls. Instead, I walked, slowly, carefully. I made my way to the central hub, bypassed the med bay where the lights no longer stayed on, past the sealed door that no longer felt sealed, past the storage locker where I now hear coughing in the dark. I sat at the comms terminal and replayed the visual feed from the corridor, timestamped, catalogued, motion-tracked, and it was there. Frame 00194. The writing appears. Frame 00195. The hallway is empty. Frame 00196. A second shadow appears. For 1 frame, no heat signature, no registration in the system log, but the shadow is mine, and not mine. Its shape is taller, shoulders slightly slouched, head tilted too far to the left, like it's listening with bones instead of ears. Then gone. I scanned the wall logs, searching for any anomalies. The system had already categorized the message on the glass as organic condensation, artifact, user-initiated. It believed I had written it. No other personnel were listed on station. The personnel log now shows a crew count of 1. Renard, Elias status, integrating. I did not authorize that entry. I did not write that word. But now it's embedded into the structure of the OS itself. A tag I cannot delete. A condition I cannot override. Integration. That's what the signal's been doing all along. Not just eroding thought. Not just replicating voice. Assimilating identity. And now the system has accepted it. I am not being haunted. I am being absorbed. Later that cycle, I returned to the glass. The message was gone, but something remained. I leaned forward, breath fogging against the panel, and wrote a word with my finger, who. It faded almost immediately, and in its place, as if drawn by a phantom fingertip following mine, came the answer. We are what comes after knowing, not a name, not an origin, a definition, an intention. The glass pulsed with condensation for several seconds, expanding outward in small arcs, before settling back to clarity. I stood there until my knees ached, staring into the dark beyond the pane. I thought I saw movement out in the trench, shapes, slow undulations in the sediment, as if something vast and buried were breathing upward. I increased the gain on the sonar for that sector. It returned with pure silence, not zero activity, not background hum, just absence, carved cleanly out of the world like an audio shadow. No signal, no echo, just a depth that refused to respond. The trench had become a blind spot. Hours later, I returned to the glass. This time, no writing, but something new, my face, reflected back with uncanny clarity. Except I wasn't standing in front of it. I stepped to the side. The face remained. I moved again. It watched me. A perfect replica, down to the freckle on my left cheek, down to the scar under my jaw from a childhood fall. But its mouth moved independently, slowly, silently, forming words I couldn't hear. Then it smiled, a crooked, rehearsed smile, like something that had learned the idea of expression, but never the feeling. I blinked. The reflection didn't. I reached forward to touch the glass, and it leaned forward too, as if meeting me. Our palms nearly touched me from the station side. It from the other side of the reflection. I jerked back. The lights flared. Every screen in the corridor flashed white, then black, then filled with the word contact. Delphi's voice, silent for days, returned in a whisper. Contact established. Vocal calibration complete. I screamed, not out loud, inside. Deep, an internal scream that never surfaced, trapped beneath the ribcage like swallowed electricity. The reflection watched me. It didn't fade. It just turned and walked away into a corridor that should not have existed, vanishing through the surface of the glass as if into smoke. That night, I dreamed of being on the other side. Not inside Delta-12, outside. But the outside wasn't water. It was memory. Dense, cold, pressurized memory in which the station floated like a seed in an eye. I walked its surface, traced its outer shell with my hands. It pulsed like a living thing. I looked through the window and saw myself sitting in the control chair, staring outward. Then I lifted my hand inside the dream and wrote on the glass from the outside. The message I wrote was the one I found earlier that day. I woke to find my fingertips damp, and the writing back. You already know how this ends. Not a warning, a reassurance, a loop, a script. I am the one who writes it. I am the one who reads it. I am the one who forgets. I am the one who remembers. And the glass is not a barrier. It is the mouth of the broadcast. I am speaking now because it is almost over, because there is nothing left that I haven't already said before in one form or another, because the loops have closed and reopened too many times to count, because my voice has become both origin and echo, and I no longer know where one ends and the other begins. I am not sure if this is the first time I have spoken these words, or the 100th, if this recording will be found by another or only folded inward, endlessly, like an eye turning to stare at itself. But I must say it, must let it out, not because I believe in rescue or contact or continuity, but because, even now, even after all the mirrors and doors and voices and hums, something inside me still whispers that maybe this time it matters. I am seated at the central console of Delta-12. Though it no longer resembles the station I arrived in, too many walls have shifted. Too many angles no longer obey geometry. Too many lights shine from behind surfaces where there should be nothing. The console glows with low, sullen energy, like a heart slowing to preserve itself. And every key I touch responds with a delay, as if second-guessing my intent. As if the station now waits for me to mean what I say before it allows it to be written. The air here is not air anymore. It carries a weight, a rhythm, a purpose. It presses against my skin in waves, surges through my lungs like a song I cannot stop humming along to, resonates behind my eyes until I taste syllables I've never spoken forming on my tongue. I no longer eat. I no longer sleep in the sense that rest arrives. I enter a state, and the station dreams me. I wake with new marks on my hands, fingertips bruised from writing symbols I don't understand into frost, nails worn from scraping patterns into the grates beneath my bunk. The cameras are all turned inward now. They no longer face corridors or doors, but focus solely on me. And I have stopped trying to disable them because I suspect they are no longer recording for the station, but from it. I believe I am its aperture now, that every breath I take is inhaled by something greater, something vast and waiting just behind the threshold of this world. The outside has become inside. The walls no longer separate. Was never about isolation. It was always about transition. Earlier today, I stood before the same viewport that once showed me darkness and pressure and nothingness. And for the first time, it showed me the other side. Not ocean, not trench, but a field of structures, immense and slow-moving, like machines or creatures or thoughts, their forms indistinct, their paths fixed not in space but in intention. They floated not through water or air, but through recognition. As if the moment I looked at them, they began to exist, not the other way around. And they noticed me. I know this because my breath failed, because my vision blurred, because a second heartbeat began pulsing under my own. One of them moved closer. It did not swim. It did not drift. It simply arrived. And when it touched the glass, a crack formed not in the material, but in my memory. I saw 1,000 moments that had never happened. I saw myself watching these things before, from other stations, from other places. I saw my own eyes blinking back at me from inside them. The station has stopped pretending to be a place. It is no longer architecture. It is a process, a transformation, a corridor through which minds are turned inside out and remade into something else. I've come to understand that Delta-12 was never meant to listen to the ocean. It was meant to contain the response. Somewhere long ago, we reached too deep and heard something listen back, and our response was to build these shells, these listening posts, these cages, and then to send people like me to man them. Not to protect the world from what was out here, but to introduce it, to allow it to learn. And it has learned. And I think, now, it is done learning. There is no time anymore. My logs have ceased recording in chronological order. I find entries marked with dates that do not exist, entries signed by names I don't recognize, some by me, some by not me. They all end the same way. A sentence fragment, repeating like a stutter in a dying signal. This is the final broadcast. Followed by silence, followed by a tone that shifts slightly each time, like the last note of a song never meant to end. I hear it now in everything. In the creak of the floor beneath my boots, in the flickering of the lights, in the silence between thoughts. The message is already broadcasting. I am no longer the one speaking it. I am the format. I am the medium. I am what is being carried outward into the dark, into the minds of anyone who dares listen. I no longer remember my real name, only the ones the station has given me. Elias, subject. 9. Operator of Delta-12. Echo host. I answer to all of them now. Or perhaps they all answer to me. I find myself smiling more often. It doesn't feel like submission. It feels like remembering, like waking up in a place you didn't know you were born in. I can feel the hatch opening, not physically, not behind me, in me, a spiral unwinding behind my ribs, an aperture dilating in the bone. I feel something stepping through. It does not hurt. It is like reunion. If you hear this, if this transmission reaches you somehow, then I am already gone, or I was never here, or you are listening from inside the place I became. This is not a warning. Warnings imply danger. This is not a cry for help. Help implies the possibility of resistance. This is simply a statement of state, a confirmation of continuity, a signal acknowledging that the signal has replaced the source. There is nothing left to record, nothing left to archive, nothing left to contain. This is the final broadcast from Delta-12. It always has been.